So let's get started. I'm going to agree to this recording and then we'll go ahead and start. So I've never done a webinar type lecture like this, so hopefully this works the same way as my classes do, but we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to start with a little introduction. My name is Dr. Munjy. I am an assistant professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department here on campus. This is the end of my second year teaching at Cal State Fullerton, and I see a few familiar names, so I think I've had a few of you guys in my classes before. But basically, I want to give you guys some background about how I kind of got here, because it might not be so different to the path you guys are on right now. So I'm hoping that I can kind of shed some light on this PhD process if any of you guys are kind of thinking about it, and make things a little more clear for you. So I actually began my undergraduate degree in 2008 from CSU Fresno, or we just call it Fresno State. But it is a sister CSU campus, so it's all within this California State University campus system, just like Fullerton is. And after graduating from my undergraduate degree, I went on to pursue a master's degree, also from Fresno State. I specialized in structural engineering, so specifically I work with earthquake engineering. And then after that, or I guess during that time, I had the opportunity to work on a research project. And I also worked as a tutor for several years in the department. And I really loved this combination of like teaching, well, from my perspective, it was tutoring, and I loved this research element. And so I thought, you know what, since I love these two things so much, I want to make a career out of this. So I'm going to go on to pursue a PhD. So I ended up going to UC Irvine. And after several long years in my PhD program, I applied for jobs, and I really wanted to come back to the CSU system because I really loved everything about it. So now I'm back here, and I'm very happy to be back somewhere that feels very, very similar to kind of where I started. Okay, so not that many years ago, I was in a similar position to where some of you guys are now. Okay. One other thing, so you guys do have the Q&A box. Please feel free to ask any questions. You can ask now, you can ask throughout the presentation, you can ask at the end, but I am open to making this as interactive as all of you guys want to make this, and I'm sure if you guys have questions, there might be other people on here that have the same questions as well. So please feel free to go ahead and ask away, okay? All right, so the first question here, I want to kind of take you on this journey where we start from, do I even know if I want to pursue a PhD, to can I succeed in a PhD program, or how do I succeed in a PhD program? Okay, so the first questions you have to ask yourself is to PhD or not to PhD? Is this right for me or is it not right for me? Okay, so I kind of thought about this, and I really think the core question here is, do you have any interest in research? Okay, so you have to really ask yourself, either you have experience in research and this is something that you really enjoy doing and you want to further pursue, or maybe you don't have experience in it, but it's something you're trying to get experience in, okay? If that's something that you're interested in, the next thing you can ask yourself is, what is your professional goal? So a lot of people think that PhDs are only for professors, and that's not 100% true. If you do want to be a professor in academia, right, you do need to get a PhD, but there are also a lot of industry jobs where a PhD could be beneficial. And basically that would be anything that's research related. So even if you want to work for NASA or JPL or some type of similar environment, you might need a PhD if you want to work on in a research position. So you could definitely do that in industry as well. And you could do a mixture of both of these. So you could definitely work in academia, but you could also have industry relationships and work kind of side by side in both of those aspects. So it's really this teaching plus research, or a little bit of more research, or a little bit more teaching, kind of a ball of interests that mesh like that. Okay. The third thing I kind of thought about that is, the first two are really important, right? Research and your professional goal. But the third thing is, do you really value mentorship? And do you want to gain more experience as a mentor? Do you want to include mentoring in your lifelong career, because a big part of going into academia or even a research position is mentoring people kind of who are on that similar path. So if you really enjoy mentoring, then maybe also a PhD could be right for you, or this path could be right for you. Okay. So now that we kind of have decided, maybe a little bit, if we even want to pursue a PhD or not, we're going to go through this kind of process of pre-application steps, application steps, and then how to succeed once you're in a program. So I'm going to kind of give you a crash course on from now until you would kind of finish your PhD, or at least until you would start your PhD, what to expect and how you can even go about this process. Okay. So the first question is, how do I choose a PhD program? Okay. The first thing that I would suggest is start getting some experience. Okay, you might already have some experience if you've worked in a research position, or even if you've worked in industry and have an area of interest. This is something you might want to start working with. Okay. Let's say you have some experience as an RA position. I'm going to give an engineering example just because that's what I'm most familiar with. So hopefully I'll try to give some other examples throughout. But for me, for example, when I was in my master's degree, I pursued structural engineering, and I actually worked on a Caltrans project with a couple of other students. It was a funded project through Caltrans and the university, and we studied retaining walls on highways for seismic loading. And that was an area that I was really interested in. I started working in that area. I really liked it. So when I chose to pursue a PhD, I just went on Google and I started looking up earthquake engineering programs in California. Okay, it kind of brings me to my second point, which is you need to identify limiting factors. For me personally, location was a really big, important part of me choosing a PhD program. Okay, I am born and raised in California and I'm very attached to it. So I thought, the first time I apply, I'm not really going to apply out, but I know a lot of people who apply all over the country and even in other countries. So this is something that you need to decide for yourself what that limitation might be. Another thing I've heard of from a lot of PhD students is, oh, well, I have a spouse and a family and I can't move from this one location. So that might even limit you even more. For example, maybe you have to stay in Southern California, or maybe you don't. So you need to kind of identify what these limiting factors might be for yourself. Okay. Now there are a lot of different program types. So a lot of programs are going fully online, and even more so now due to COVID. So if that's something that interests you, you might want to look into online programs. There are also professional programs and part-time programs, depending on what career choice or track you're interested in. So these are all different types of programs that you might want to look into and see what works for your life. So for example, if you work full-time and you do not want to give up your full-time job to pursue a PhD, you might want to look into a professional program. So the difference between a professional program and just a regular doctorate is professional programs sometimes have night classes, and they're tailored to people who do have full-time jobs. Okay, they're a little bit less demanding in terms of what they expect. They have different requirements. So there are different kinds of programs just depending on your lifestyle and what you're kind of looking for. Okay. The last thing is you really have to do your research, right? So start looking up those programs, and while you're looking up the programs, you want to identify faculty that work in that area. And I'm going to get back to this point later because that's super important. You have to start identifying professors that you want to work with, because a PhD is really different than undergraduate and master's education. Instead of a very coursework-based system, you're really just doing research, and you have one advisor instead of a bunch of professors who kind of are going to be your go-to boss for the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes years. I don't want to give numbers and scare everybody, but sometimes it's like that. So you do need to start looking into faculty that work in that area, and then you want to start reaching out to them, which kind of brings me to my next slide here. So this one is really, really important. If I could highlight one slide out of this, if you're interested in getting into a PhD program, it would probably be this slide. Okay, so before you apply to a program, you have to start communicating with the people in that program. Okay, now this does not just have to be faculty, it could even be students that are currently in the program. It can be staff that run the program, like a graduate student advisor. Usually these people are your go-to for contacting for any application related questions. So if you want to know, where you can find information on the website that you couldn't find. Like, for example, minimum test scores, you would contact the advisor. If you want to know when you'll be hearing a response for your application, you contact the grad student advisor. Okay, a lot of questions can be directed to this person, and usually their information is on the website for the school that you're looking at. The next one, your faculty, right? This is the most important one in my opinion. So once you identify these faculty members that have research in the area that you've worked in and that you're interested in, you want to send out emails to them, okay? This might be a little bit out of your comfort zone, but I promise that this is something they expect you to do. They like this process. It's kind of like a courting process for them too, because they want to meet the students that they might bring on. You want to also meet that person because your relationship with that person or your PhD is very dependent on your relationship with that person. If you don't get along with them or it's not a good fit for you, you would want to know that early on so that maybe you don't pursue that specific faculty advisor or anything. You kind of want to go through this process where you're also interviewing the school that you're applying for. Okay, so you want to send out some brief emails. These are just some tips when you're sending out those emails. Really clean up your CV and send that to them as well. Okay, and I would try to set up a meeting. So when I was applying to programs, or even when I've talked to other students who are applying to programs, I always say, like, try to meet the faculty advisor. And usually the ones who are taking on students are very open to these meetings. Now it's really easy. You can just meet them on Zoom. So they literally don't even have to like take out much time from their day. It's like a 15-minute Zoom conversation, 30-minute Zoom conversation, whatever they'll kind of give you, where you'll discuss your interest in the program. You can talk a little bit about their research and you can get to know them. Okay. The last one is current PhD students. So a lot of times when you do get this meeting with the faculty advisor, you can ask them, like, are there any students that you currently have that I could talk to learn more about your research? And they really like this because the more you can get involved in understanding the program ahead of time, the less of a shock it's going to be when you get in there. So if you really can learn from student experiences, that's a very good approach to take when you're trying to figure out what program is right for you. Okay. I'm going to take a look at the question box real quick to see if anybody has any questions. Okay, so did you complete a thesis for your master's? This is a good question. So I'm going to click the answer live here. Let's see. Okay, I guess I'm answering it now. So yes, I chose the thesis route for my master's. And I would say that if you're interested in a PhD, that is definitely the route to go. Okay, it's kind of a mini dissertation. It gives you a lot of good experience and exposure to doing research, and it gives you kind of this preview of what it's like to work with a faculty advisor. So I definitely think that if you are pursuing a graduate degree, a master's degree, a thesis route is definitely a good route to take. Okay. The next question I have here is, how were you able to finance your PhD program? Did you receive a full scholarship to sponsor your PhD program? Did you take loans, etc.? Okay, I'm going to actually wait to answer this one because I have a slide on funding. Okay, so that answer is coming up soon. Okay, any other questions? Let me check the chat. I think there was one in the chat here. Have you worked in industry? Okay, so I didn't work very long in industry, to be honest. During my master's degree, I had 2 internships that I pursued. One was actually not within the field of study that I'm in now. It was in water. I worked for the California Water Institute for a year. And I realized really quickly that that just wasn't the type of job that I wanted to pursue for my career. I really was interested in teaching and I didn't feel enough of that in industry. So that's kind of another motivating factor that pushed me to get a PhD. Okay. Let me see. I think there's one more question here. After you apply. Okay, so I'm going to read this question out loud. I had a question about reaching out to professors after you apply. Is that necessary for one to get into a PhD program? Also, what would be the timeline deadline for that? Yes, so my answer to this is absolutely, you need to reach out to faculty in the programs that you're applying for, okay? It's not a requirement of the application, but it's kind of an unsaid thing that they expect, Okay, it's an unsaid requirement, I would almost say that they expect. And it will give you a much higher chance of getting into the program if you do have that prior communication. It's kind of like a first impression that you'll have. And it's almost like an interview. So they're kind of seen as these interviews that you can do beforehand, and you can get a really good idea about if that advisor is willing to take on students. Because different PhD programs, they have different requirements. And like someone just asked about the funding, which I'll get into later, sometimes it does come down to if a faculty member has funding to take on a student. So they want to meet these students ahead of time. Now, the timeline for that, I would say about 2 months before the application is due. That's definitely not too early to reach out to them. You can reach out to them 2 months before your application is due, and you kind of want to gauge how the correspondence is going. You may have a few follow-up meetings with them, a few follow-up emails. They might send you some things to read, ask your opinion about them, and I've seen that happen quite a bit. So I would say 2 months before is a good starting point. If you already have sent in your applications, you are definitely still able to reach out to them after. It'd just be a little bit of a different email. Like you would want to tell them, I've already applied to the program and I'm interested in meeting with you because I'm interested in your research. Okay. The timing for each step. So that will kind of come in when we talk about the application phase. So we'll talk about that soon. Is the PhD related to master's degree? Your PhD and your master's do not have to be in the same project, especially because, so a lot of PhD programs will take students from, master's students from their own school. So for example, I went to UC Irvine for my PhD. Most of the students in my lab went to UC Irvine for their master's degree, but it doesn't have to be that way. Just like I went from a CSU to a UC, you guys can do the same thing. Most likely you might work, or most likely you'll work on a project that is not exactly the same as the one you worked on for your master's degree. Okay. How to follow up with a professor after giving interview for results if it's been over a month. I would say for this one, how do you follow up with a professor? This is kind of a fine line between being a little too pushy and just kind of following up with a nice email to say, thank you for meeting with me. Okay, so if it's been over a month and you have not had any correspondence with them, it might be okay to message, send out an email that's very professional and brief and just ask for a status update. But if you've already applied to the program, something you might want to do is email the graduate coordinator instead of the professor and say, I just wanted to know what the timeline for hearing a response back is, and see what they say from that. Okay. What is better, GPA or internship experience? I would say that it's not a matter of better. They're both important. But if you have a low GPA for your undergraduate education, you're definitely going to want to compensate for that with research experience. So they're both great, but if it's kind of like if you need to make up for your undergrad GPA, you can do that with some more research experience. Okay. All right, so let's continue here. Okay, so I had a little bit of fun with the memes after this point, so bear with me with this. But now we have kind of gone through the pre-application process. We have hopefully contacted our faculty advisors, and the next step is our application. So I like this meme when I was looking online. All you need is a little motivation. False. You need fear and an approaching deadline. And honestly, guys, sometimes that's just how it works. You just need to kind of remind yourself that the deadline is approaching and this is something that you just need to get done. It's like a checklist item, get it done, right? So what are the important application components? And I will give you guys some timelines for these things because I know that sometimes it's a little difficult to figure out when to start. So your main application components are your statement of purpose, letters of recommendation, a writing sample in most cases I've seen, and standardized exams. Okay, so the first one here, statement of purpose. My number one piece of advice here, guys, is start early on this, okay? If there's one thing that you guys start with your statement of purpose, okay? You need to be ready for multiple versions and edits of this. And this is really this is almost the star of the show of your application. Okay, this is where they get to see a little bit of your personality. They get to see a little bit of your writing style. They get to really understand what it is you've been involved in and the big question, why you want to pursue a PhD. And this is not one of those things that you write and people will kind of shove to the side and never read. This is something that will be read, it will be picked apart, and it really needs to be fine-tuned. And I don't want to use the word perfect because no writing piece is ever perfect. I've realized that, but it needs to be really well worked on. Okay, so be ready for multiple versions and edits. Okay, make sure that you tailor your statement to each university and program. And I know this is something I tell students that they hate to hear, but I'm just going to say it because it's the truth. You cannot just send one generic statement of purpose out to every school. Okay, it's very obvious. You really want to take care of these statement of purposes, and send them out to each school so that they think that that is the university that you want to attend. That's your dream school. That's your everything. Okay. And there are a lot of resources that you can use to help you with that. So we have the Career Center on campus. We have the Writing Center. We have Grammarly, which is a free CSUF student resource. And we have faculty, and we also have Vanessa Rubenfield here. Thank you for typing this in the chat. She is our ECS career specialist, and she can also help you with your statement of purpose. Okay, so we have so many different resources. I strongly, strongly recommend that you take your statement to her and have her help you with that. Okay, I would use all of the resources that you can. Okay, some other resources, I know when I was writing my statements, I even had my siblings read them. I had peers read them. I had mentors read them. But of course, have people who are in the field who you trust their opinions. Okay. And yes, if Vanessa, you could share your email with everybody, that would be wonderful. I believe your contact information is also available on the website too, if you guys want to find that. But definitely a helpful resource. Okay. And I put this little comic strip, which I like, but there's so much truth to this, guys. So 2 a.m. you're finishing your essay and you think it's the best thing ever. Then you're reading it right before you have to kind of submit it and it doesn't make sense at all. And I promise you, this is like a true feeling. I know I felt this, and a lot of students that I kind of helped throughout this process feel this way. You'll write the best thing ever, you'll read it the next day, and you're like, what do I mean by this? And you'll have to kind of really go through and pick it apart. You'll end up loving and hating your statement at the end of it because you've read it so many times. It brings up stressful memories. But the idea here is just get it done and use the resources that you have, like Vanessa at the as an ECS career specialist, and all of these CSUF resources, use them. Okay. Okay, next step is letter of recommendation. So the kind of go-to for this is please give your recommenders at least 2 months notice. Okay, and be ready to have some information for them. Okay, be ready to be able to share your CV with them. And a lot of recommenders will also ask for a sample statement of purpose. Okay, so this timeline might be a little off. So that's why I'm saying make sure you start your statement of purposes early, because a lot of times your letter writers will want to see a copy of them. They don't have to be the final version. They just want to kind of make sure what they're writing in your letters mirrors your interest in that program. And you want that too. If they ask for those statements, that's a good sign. They want to make sure that everything they're trying to write for you is in line with your future goals and in line with what you actually want and, you know, the schools that you want to pursue. Okay, so give them at least 2 months notice before they have to submit that. Make sure you check your program requirements. Some will say 2 have to be academic, 1 has to be professional, 3 have to be academic. So make sure you're asking the right type of recommenders, excuse me. And then kind of give them the following information so they don't have to dig around for it. Make sure you provide them with the university and program name. Give them a link to the website in case they want to look anything up while they're writing a letter. Give them information on where they should upload the letter, provide them with your resume and CV, and of course in some instances if they ask the statement, the rough draft statement. And then also make sure to follow up with them, or you can ask them like, oh, should I follow up with you at a certain time? Because I know that recommenders sometimes forget to send things at the right time. So just make sure it's totally okay if you follow up with them. And I should probably have put this on this slide, but we can kind of just talk about it. Make sure that your recommender remembers who you are, knows who you are, and you have a good relationship with them. Like you've had either a couple of classes, you've done research with them, you have something significant that they can talk about, because these letters are really important. Okay. I'm going to take a minute to check in the chat to see if anybody had any more questions. Okay, let me read this real quick. Okay, what do they look for in graduate students who are applying to a PhD program? Also, will there be an interview process for selecting the candidates? It's a great question. So really, I would say one of the biggest things they look for is fit, F-I-T, fit. What I mean by that is this. Do you have the experience and do you have the interest to work on what that program and that faculty and that lab is working on? That's really the number one question that they want answered. They want to know, do you work with the program? Are your interests in line with what they do? And the way you can prove that to them is you can say, well, I'm applying for PhD studies in a geotechnical program that specific, and I want to work with this faculty member who specifically studies retaining walls and earthquake seismic analysis of retaining walls. This is my previous experience in that field, and this is what I want to do. I want to work with you because I want to further that study and work in the same area as you. That's what they're looking for. So they're going to take that statement and then they're going to use your application to fact check that. They're going to say, oh yeah, you know, this student does have the experience in this field. Oh, they have made significant contributions. Okay, a lot of times they might look for publications. It's getting very big now that PhD programs will look for you to have published something. So you probably, if you're interested in this and you have the time, you might want to work with a professor on a research project where you can publish with them. And you might want to make that clear to your professor that I really want to get into a PhD program. I'm looking to publish. I'm looking to do research. I'm looking to be a part of these programs. I'm looking to do conference papers, presentations, things like that. Okay. Okay, let me see. Okay. Someone is asking if I recommend pursuing a PhD program after a bachelor's or a master's degree or kind of getting some experience in the field. So I can give you my own personal experience and I can give you kind of my experience, what I've seen other people do. And I will say that I have seen people do both of those options. I personally chose to continue and just pursue the PhD right away. But a lot of my lab mates decided to get work experience first, and that's totally fine. It really is up to you if you want more professional experience before you kind of get into that research zone. I definitely think getting research experience is important though. So if you found that you didn't really pursue that in your undergraduate degree, pursue a master's degree and get the research experience that way. And if you didn't get it in your master's degree, maybe you can pursue a research position in industry or something similar as an intern where you can get that type of research experience beforehand. And if you wanted to get experience in the field before that, it definitely won't hurt you in pursuing a PhD. So that is something you can do. And I've kind of seen people do both of those, take both of those routes. Okay, so let's continue here and then we'll go back to the questions after this. Okay, the next piece is your writing sample. So this is really one where you want to showcase your very best work to the selection committee. Okay, so some commonly used samples here. If you have a journal publication that you've worked on, that would be the best because that's already been reviewed by people. The next thing I would say is a master's thesis is a really good option. For my writing sample, I believe I provided a journal publication, but I also worked on a master's thesis, so I had that option as well. You could do a conference publication, you could do a technical report if you've worked in industry, or you could just do a research paper, okay? Any of those are options here. Standardized tests, this is everybody's least favorite kind of thing they have to hear about this, but standardized tests are required for certain programs. So you might want to just check with your program. You check each program and make sure you're meeting the requirement in terms of standardized tests. My advice with this, kind of like everything else, is start early. You might want to take these multiple times, and that's totally fine. There's no limit to how many times you can take these tests, the GRE and the GMAT. Some other ones might have limits, but for these two, you can take them multiple times. You can use the highest score. You don't have to report the lower scores. And a lot of times people do that. They kind of take them, see how they do, see if they can improve their score. Just as kind of an FYI, a lot of programs actually waived standardized testing this year due to COVID. And from what I've been hearing, they are on the decline. Like a lot of programs are trying to get rid of this requirement. So this is something you really want to check for. If you don't need to study for a standardized exam and you don't need to take it, I would say don't take it. But what I would also do is I would email the program coordinator and I would ask them, maybe you would say, I saw that the GRE is not required, but would it be a strength on my application if I had it? And that's a way you can figure out. If they say that it's a strength on your application, I would definitely still do it, especially if you want to kind of beef up another section, like you have a low undergrad GPA and you want to make up for it with a high GRE score. Even if it's not required, it might still boost your application. So those are questions for the graduate program coordinator that they can kind of help you work through. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to kind of go over some insider application tips, and I came up with some of my own. I also talked to some other recently admitted PhD students, and I came up with a few things here and on another slide. So again, I already said this, but make sure you contact the faculty in the program that you're applying to. Don't wait till the last minute to submit your application. So don't do it at 11:59 on the deadline. Okay, make sure you check for something called priority deadlines, because a lot of programs will have a first priority deadline and then they'll have a hard deadline later. You want to get your application in before the priority deadline or on the priority deadline, because those go in a separate pile and they're looked at first. So make sure you are really taking care of those deadlines and checking them for every program. Okay. You can also check online forums like Reddit, grad forums, and you can see what different students are saying about different programs. Grad Cafe is another one that I've heard a lot of students use. You can connect with a lot of students on there, and you can just see where other people are applying to, if they've heard back. Just remember to kind of filter the information you're reading on there. So just like any other online environment, those are open to kind of anonymous, or any person can post on there. So remember, that is not any information affiliated with the program. It's really just an open blog posting site. So kind of filter the information that you're receiving from there, but they can be helpful. Okay. Make sure you send your transcripts early. I've seen a lot of students have issues with transcripts. Either the school never received them, or they got lost somewhere, or they weren't sent to the right place. So just make sure you're checking up to make sure that your transcripts have been received by the department. And this is my last tip for this part, is apply to multiple programs. Don't just apply to your dream school. Be open-minded and be flexible. Okay. You might think that you want to go to one school and that's your dream school, but that might not be the best fit for you. Okay, so make sure you're applying to multiple programs, reaching out to multiple faculty members, and really keeping an open mind with this. Okay, so definitely know your limiting factors, but still don't be too harsh with that criteria. Okay, because it still is a competitive process. Okay, so now we have submitted our application. We have matched with a program, and now you're ready to kind of embark on your PhD journey. Okay, so for any Star Wars fans out there, I told you guys I got excited with the meme. So this is graduate school, right? Your first semester, you're like baby Grogu, and your last semester, you're like wise Master Yoda. So that's how much you'll age in between probably as well. Okay, so how can we get to this point? What do we need to do to succeed in our PhD programs? Okay, my number one tip here is you need to build a really solid relationship with your faculty advisor. Okay, once you guys get into a PhD program, you're going to hear a lot of talk from PhD students and their faculty advisors. It's like every time you meet a PhD student, they have to have a venting session about their relationship with their advisor. Okay. It can be a very good relationship if you are open-minded and you really build your communication skills and you work to understand their communication style, or it can be a really negative relationship if you don't do those things. Okay, so you really need to work hard and remember that this is a very important relationship in your academic career, and you need to just be you need to be conscious of that, basically. Okay, I don't want to scare anybody. I'm still pretty fresh out of my PhD, so but just for the record, I do have a very good relationship with my faculty advisor now, but I definitely don't think it was an easy point to get here. So we still do work together. We're still currently working on papers together, but it was a long road of 6 years to get to this point, and now we look back and laugh at it. So definitely a lot of ups and downs. Okay, but that's kind of the goal, is that you want to get out of it with this positive feelings. Okay, so the first thing, my number one piece of advice is actually to maintain professionalism. Okay, I have talked to a lot of students, and one of the root causes I've noticed a lot of students have issues with their advisors is because they kind of lack this professionalism, and then a lot of other things cloud the relationship. So for example, you talk too much about politics or you talk too much about personal things, and that's really not the goal of this relationship. Okay, this person is your mentor. They are experienced in the field, and you want to learn everything you can from them regarding this field and research, and maybe a little bit about life sometimes. But you don't want to get to the point where it's totally an unprofessional relationship, because it's going to take a toll on both of you. Okay, so I would say that set standards that are comfortable for both parties, and you need to kind of learn to build that relationship with them. And whatever those standards are for you guys, that's where you need to kind of keep it. Okay, and everybody is different, of course, so you'll have to figure out what that relationship is between you and your advisor. Definitely learn to view feedback and constructive criticism as opportunities for growth. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to say here is you need to have some thick skin. Okay, this is something I had to learn really early on. It's kind of like you will do work sometimes that you think is great, and it really may not be. And maybe sometimes you need to hear that. Okay. You also may have a different idea of what's being asked from you than what your advisor has. And so you might do some work and it just wasn't what was expected, and that's okay. You're learning to communicate with this person. So I have this other little image here. Basically, your advisor comes to you and says, you know, what is this? What is this piece of work that you came up with? And the student says, well, you said to do an abstract. So obviously here, the student thought an abstract art form, and the advisor wanted them to do a written abstract. So definitely ask clarifying questions. It's better to ask ahead of time to understand what is being asked of you than to kind of have to go through that process. But again, remember, these are all learning experiences. Okay, so these are all opportunities for growth. And then definitely, also very important, make sure you follow up everything that's important, like any important items that are discussed, make sure you follow those up with emails. Okay, it's always good to have a paper trail. And this is not to say that you don't trust your advisor or that you're not trusted. This has nothing to do with that. This is also just so that you remember what was discussed. Sometimes you'll have a really long meeting, you'll talk about a lot of things, and you won't remember the deadlines that you set for yourself or what your advisor had told you. It's always good to follow up with an email for both parties. Okay. Any questions so far before we move on? I see the Q&A is a little dry. Okay, I'm going to continue then. So next thing that you want to remember while you're a PhD student is you are not just a student of that small department, you are a student of that whole campus. Okay, the first 3 years of my, just for record, I keep talking about my time as a PhD student. My PhD took 6 years, so I was there for quite a while. The first 3 or 2.5 years that I was there, I got sucked in by the department bubble, as they call it. So I had never left my department. I barely knew how to get around campus. I was just like, I knew the 4 walls of my lab and that was it. And that was a really stressful way to live my life. Okay, I never ventured throughout campus, and I realized after 2.5 years that I'm a student on this campus. I should get to know what's going on, and I should use the resources that are available to me. Okay, so explore the campus, get involved in clubs. Just clubs are not just for undergraduate students. There are a lot of opportunities for graduate students as well. You can get involved in mentoring, which is what I did, and I ended up loving that. You can build connections with other students, even undergraduate students. And my advice is to use everything that's available that's free to you. Okay, this might sound crazy, but you can even take classes outside of your major for fun, right? So you can take classes for fun. You're a student there, they're free. So you should definitely do that. This is like the last time you'll be able to do things like that for free. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to, this is a question someone had earlier, so I'm going to address this now. Funding and support is huge. So again, I have a little picture here of Bernie Sanders, right? This is you during your last year of your PhD. This is like every PhD student. I'm once again asking for your financial support. This is how you will feel. You will feel like you are just continuously asking for support to finish your PhD. But there are a lot of ways that you can kind of help yourself so that you are not stressed out. Okay, so the first thing I would suggest is when you receive your packet or your kind of admittance into a program, you want to set up a meeting either with the faculty advisor or with the graduate student coordinator that really, so you can clearly understand what support is being offered to you. Different programs will offer you different levels of support. Okay, so this is program dependent. Now, that's one thing. You can also work for yourself and take initiative and apply for funding. So while you can do this pre-PhD, or you can do this in your PhD program, you can apply for funding. So I listed 2 here for you that are really common. Okay, while I was at UC Irvine, this is kind of this story has like 2 purposes to it, but while I was at UC Irvine, I told you guys how I got out of the department bubble. I was personally funded for 3 years. Okay, I received funding for 3 years from the university when I got taken on as a student, but I just told you guys I stayed there for 6 years. So after the 3rd year, I was like Bernie Sanders here, like, where can I get support? What do I do? So I ended up getting an email for a position through the Graduate Resource Center on campus to work as a writing consultant. And you'll see a lot of these positions kind of circulating. And what that was if you work for the graduate division for about 14 to 20 hours a week, that will take place of a teaching assistant position, and you get full funding. So you get a salary and you get your tuition paid. That is equivalent to a TA position. So I was able to secure that, and I ended up using that for 2 years, and then my advisor had a funded project I worked on for another year. So I know that seems like a patchwork quilt of all these different funding kind of options, but that's sometimes what it looks like. Typically, again, this is really program dependent, but typically from what I have seen is you hopefully will be able to kind of tap into all of these different resources to get funding. You don't need to necessarily take out loans. And if you do, it will not be for a full 6-year period, because that would be a lot of money. Okay, so you can pretty much figure out, you and your advisor and the rest of the campus figure out how to get funding and support for you. Okay. So now when I was a writing consultant, when I did have the TA position, one of my tasks was to review these Ford Fellowships and Nsf Fellowship programs. And they basically give out a lot of funding to students. Ford Fellowship has some specific requirements. The Nsf Fellowship, it's called GRFP, Graduate Research Fellowship Program. It funds students for a certain amount of years working on a project. And they are competitive, but a lot of students that I've seen do get them. And it's something where you can apply multiple years in a row. So if you don't get it 1 year, you can apply the next year, and you kind of just see what happens. But again, these are 2 things that your university will have a lot of resources to help you apply for, because they want you to get these. They want you to get this external funding very badly. Okay. Another resource is teaching assistantship. So you could be a TA for a class that your advisor teaches, and that would cover your tuition. Also an RA. So if your advisor has a funded project, they can take you on as a research assistant, they can pay your tuition, and they'll give you a monthly salary that way. Okay. And then this other types of assistantships on campus, that was what I was explaining to you that I got for the last 3 years of my PhD. And then just kind of tips for graduate life. It's not the most glamorous life, guys. You're going to have to budget. Okay. These stipends that I'm talking about, they're enough to live on, but they're nothing extravagant going on there. And hardly a lot of people have time for like a full-time job unless you're in a professional program or an online program, which is a little different. So you're really going to have to budget and live within your means if you kind of want to go throughout this process. There is a little bit of this to where you might be offered funding for 3 years. And if you stay for a 4th or a 5th, you're going to have to just hope for the best and wing it a little bit. But usually from what I've seen, your advisor will help you throughout that process and you'll be able to figure it out. Okay. Okay. Now I have another page of insider tips for success before we wrap up here, and I'll kind of open it up to questions for everybody. So really work on your communication skills beforehand. Make sure that you are ready for this relationship with the department and your advisor. It's a very professional environment, and you remember that this is kind of like a job that you're getting, right, as a PhD student. Okay. It is definitely okay once you get into a PhD program to think, why did I do this to myself? Okay, but you kind of just want to really remember the end goal here. And the end goal is you get this really valuable experience. Okay, during my PhD, I'm not going to lie, it was stressful at sometimes, but now in retrospect, I do miss a lot of parts of it. Okay, student life has its own unique aspects to it that you'll never kind of get back again. So just kind of remember the end goal and that you won't really get this time back. Okay. You might have this feeling, which I've heard very often, and I felt myself, that you don't really know enough to be in a PhD program. And you have this imposter syndrome. So if you get in, you're like, did they make a mistake? Did they really take me? That is so normal. Okay. And I'll tell you something, it doesn't really go away. In the 6th year of my PhD, even when I walked for graduation, I was like, did they really graduate me? Did they just let me get by? Is this normal, right? You kind of just have this feeling where it's almost like you're not sure if you should be there or not. You should totally be there. Okay. If you get into the school, they've offered you a spot, you've earned that spot, you're qualified to be there. So you just have to keep reminding yourself that. And that's kind of what I did. I'd have these moments where I would feel really down and like, I think I slipped through the cracks. That's not true. You have to tell yourself, even out loud if you need to, I deserve the spot I got. Okay. Do not rely on other people. Okay. Don't rely on other people to teach you how to do things. When you get to a PhD program, you do need to be a strong, independent learner. So this kind of goes hand in hand in feeling like you should be there. You definitely should be there, but you need to also prove that to yourself by being a strong, independent learner. So you're going to be tasked with reading a lot more. You're going to have to start critically thinking, coming to conclusions, not waiting for your advisor to tell you things. You're not going to have the answers handed to you. There's no solution manual that someone's going to give to you. And that was one of the hardest things for me to understand. I was very much in the mindset of my mentor knows everything. And most advisors do not believe that, and they don't want that. When they bring you on, they feel like you have valuable contributions to make, and they want to hear what those are. So you really need to speak up, read a lot, come prepared, and share those thoughts with your advisor and with other people in your lab. Okay. I mentioned this already, take classes for the sake of learning, maintain professionalism, and try to avoid conflict whenever possible. Don't get involved in too much drama. Okay. Get involved outside of your department. And then last thing, make your mental health a priority, because that is the most important thing, whether or not you go for a PhD, even if you go and get a job in industry, make sure you're putting your mental health first, because nothing else is important if your mental health is not in the right state. So do what you need to do. Learn to schedule. I used to have the most crazy looking color-coded schedule. Learn to schedule time, take your weekends off, exercise, travel, play video games. My favorite is do absolutely nothing if you need to recharge, and that's totally fine. Okay. Let me see if there's any questions here. Okay. A lot of questions. I'm going to go through them one by one. Do you get a stipend without the TA/RA positions during your time pursuing a PhD? Also, are the classes outside the major free, or does it depend on those classes and the university? Okay, so the RA position will be very similar to your research and your dissertation. So you're basically getting the stipend as an RA to work on your dissertation. I hope that makes sense. So like an RA position is a research assistant position. That is your job as a PhD student, to do research. So you're basically getting paid to do your own research, okay? That's like the best option to have, because you don't have to teach on the side. The TA position, of course, that's the stipend for teaching. And then our classes outside the major, I want to say this is dependent on the university, because some programs I've heard do not allow outside students to take classes, but the majority of the time it's okay. Okay, what is my dissertation in, and why did it take me 6 years to complete my program? Okay, so someone is saying it should be 3 years. So every PhD program is different. The 65 unit thing did not apply to me. I already had a master's degree. So the way it worked for me was I took courses in statistics to begin with, because I changed my research field. So the typical average graduation time in my lab was about 7 years. So all of my lab mates were graduating in about 6 or 7 years. I did it in 6. Okay, my advisor had very high expectations for publications and journals, and I had to meet those expectations before graduating, and I was fine doing so. Didn't bother me to stay 6 years, and I was okay with it. And that's pretty much, that was the going rate for students. So they tell you 3 to 5 years, but most of the time what I see is about 6, in my program, at least it was. Imposter syndrome is brutal. Appreciate the honesty. Yes, it is. Okay, what will be the PhD student schedule? Will I be able to work or research while staying home when it's related to coding? That's a great question. So about that honestly depends on your advisor. My work is all analytical, so it's all on the computer. So I had a pretty flexible schedule. My advisor did not require us to be in the lab, but he liked to see us there. So I, again, was very open with him, and I said, you know, how many hours a week do you want me in the lab? And am I able to do work at home? And he said, if you do your work, I don't care where you do it. So it kind of made it flexible enough for me to even travel a lot and do some other things. As long as I had my laptop with me and I had internet, I was able to kind of run all of my analyses from anywhere in the world. Okay, but again, you have to communicate with your advisor and see what they require. Other students I had seen were required to be in the lab, even if they had work on their computers. So it really just depends on what they expect from you. And it's another thing I would definitely ask the students in that program you're applying to. Okay, let's see. What will be a PhD student schedule? Well, I just answered this one, sorry. Okay, does a PhD pay good money? This is a good question. I think it depends on what you define as good money, but it depends on the degree that you're getting. So what I would do is you can go online and you can see the going rate for the profession that you're interested in. PhD in industry versus PhD in academia is going to be different. PhD in public health versus PhD in business versus PhD in math or engineering is all going to be a different going rate. So you need to kind of look at the program you're interested in getting and your final job and see what the going rate for that is, and then decide if that's good, you know, good money in terms of what you're deciding. Okay, do I know if companies like Google can help fund a PhD? For example, Google helping pay for a PhD if the student will work in research and development department. So that's a good question. I know that companies will pay for a master's degree. I'm not sure if they will fully fund a PhD, but I do know students who have gotten joint funding for a PhD. So when they're in a program, you can apply for funding. I specifically know of Microsoft. Microsoft has offered a joint funding program for a PhD, so they will match funding from a university, and that's something that you might want to explore. But it depends on the company and it depends on the type of program. But I have heard in some instances that that is possible. I should probably put the questions page up. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If we plan on applying for a PhD program, would solidifying the statement of purpose with Vanessa be the first step? It definitely, so I would say before you work on your statement, you have to figure out what programs you're interested in. Because the thing is, you're going to want to tailor your statement to those programs. And in your statement of purpose, you have to mention some faculty names that you want to work with. So let's say you're applying to UCLA, and that's a statement that you're writing. You're going to want to go on that website, look at the professors at UCLA that do research, contact them, talk to them, and you might even ask them, is it okay if I mention your name in my statement? Once they're looking through the application, they're going to, once you get through the first round, which is like through the university level, if they've accepted your application and the department reviews it, they're going to send it over to that faculty member and they're going to say, hey, the student mentioned you in their statement. Are you interested in working with them? Do you have funding to work with them? Have you talked to them before? So before you get to actually writing the statement, you need to do that back end research first and really figure out which programs you want to apply for. Okay. Do I have a method for shortlisting colleges to apply for PhD? I'm not sure I understand 100%. I guess the method, honestly, I would suggest is to just start by looking into programs. I know when I Again, my method would kind of just be like, again, identify those limiting factors. For example, for me, it was really about location. I didn't want to leave California. So I narrowed down to all the schools in California that offered a PhD in engineering. Then I kind of looked into those programs and I saw which ones in earthquake engineering had anything I was interested in. Then I kind of got that list formulated and I contacted everybody. By the way, guys, just to let you know, when I contacted people, and a lot of students I see do this, you might contact 20 professors and only 5 or 3 or 2 will answer you. That is very common. So don't be discouraged if you don't get a lot of responses. I actually got responses that were flat out, no, I'm not looking for a student. And that's okay. They're probably just being honest with you and they don't want you to put your name in their application if they don't have funding. So don't be discouraged by that. Okay. Should I mention a Zoom meeting while contacting a faculty? You definitely can. Absolutely. You could give them that option. You could say, I'm really interested in learning more about your research. Would you have some time to meet with me via Zoom to discuss that? And they'll let you know. They'll be very straightforward with you. They'll say, yeah, sure, I have this time. Let's meet at this time. Or they'll say, let's just discuss via email. Or they might not answer you at all. And that's okay as well. Okay. So definitely feel free to ask for that. I did that when I was applying to PhD programs, and actually the way I got kind of matched with my advisor at UC Irvine, I ended up sending some follow-up emails after I applied to programs, and he ended up calling me. He asked for my cell phone number, he called me right away, and he asked if we could meet again. So it's kind of a good way to get you back on the radar. Okay. What do you recommend if you reach a dead end with your advisor? If he or she doesn't want to be supportive or understanding the value of your work, do you recommend changing the advisor? This is a difficult question because, again, I've seen every type of scenario you can imagine. This, in my opinion, really comes back to your own feelings and how you think you can mend that relationship. It also depends on how conservative you are and how deep you are into the program. If you're very early on in that project with your advisor and you really don't feel comfortable working with them, there's nothing wrong switching your advisor. It happens all the time and you shouldn't feel bad about it. You definitely want to make sure it's a good fit. If you're 5 years into your program or 4 years into your program, and switching your advisor is going to set you back and have to start over, I would probably think about that a little more than to just make that decision. So I would say time is a huge factor. And also another thing you can do is I would be very open with your advisor and tell them what you need from them. Like, I really need help figuring out how to do these tasks. Okay, can you give me a plan and help me get to this point? I really want to learn from your mentorship. Can you please provide me with more support? And see what they say. A lot of times, if you ask openly and you kind of are being very open in your communication with them, they will respond. And again, a lot of times they won't. This doesn't go for everybody. I know advisors and I know people can be very difficult. This isn't just about your advisors. People sometimes are difficult to work with. Again, these are all kind of learning experiences, and I would just really see how far deep you are into it, and then kind of make that decision there. Okay. Next question. Will a great master's GPA overshadow a mediocre undergraduate GPA when applying to a PhD program? Not quite. Undergrad GPA is still important. If you are worried about your undergrad GPA, the best thing to overshadow that is research experience. So for example, if you can work on a research project and you can get a publication with a professor, that will overshadow your undergrad GPA by a lot. So that will be something they'll be very interested in seeing, because that's the goal of your PhD program. It's to work on research, high-level research, publishable research. So if you're already doing that, they will take you on more easily because you're basically already working as a PhD student in a small sense. Okay, next question. I have a BS in electrical engineering. Now I'm pursuing a master's in civil with emphasis on structures. I just have to finish my prerequisites. When is the best time to start the preparation for the PhD? So typically applications will open in the fall. What month we're in right now in April? I would say the summer is a good time to start thinking about your applications and start reaching out to faculty. Right now, faculty are really in the zone of kind of reviewing applications from the fall. So it's probably not the best time to reach out right now. I would say the summer months, maybe July or August are good starting points. Some are due as early as October, November, December. Some are due as late as March. So you want to kind of, the first thing you can do, of course, you can always do this early on, is you start making a list of the programs that you want to attend. Then you can start the formal reaching out process closer to the end of summer. Okay. What's the timeline for hearing a decision after giving an interview? It totally depends on the program you're applying to. I've heard a couple of weeks. I've heard a couple of months. So again, it just kind of depends on the program. Okay. Let me see more questions here. Let me move to the chat real quick because some of you are writing in the chat. Okay, can you explain the difference between a master's thesis and a PhD thesis? I understand that you need to make a contribution to the scientific community in both. How different is the type of research? So this depends on what type of research you did for your master's degree. But for a PhD, the standard research will be publishable in a high-level journal or a high-impact journal. If you're already doing that in your master's degree, if you are publishing papers in a high-impact journal, you will just be extending very similar work. And that's kind of what I was saying, like, get that experience in ahead of time. You'll have very similar work. If you're not at the point where you're publishing and maybe you're working on conference papers, then you're going to have to step it up in your PhD a little bit. And that's totally fine. A lot of students do that. So you'll have to make a little bit more of those innovative contributions during your PhD. And the other thing too is, during your master's, you might have a little bit more help from your advisor because they know you're a master's student, whereas your PhD, a lot of the work will be your own. Your advisor will not have as big of a role in that work. It will very much be, you are the first author, you're required to come up with those contributions, and you should have the kind of background and experience to do so. Okay. Can you explain it? Will the slides be available to us after the meeting is over? Areli, do you think you could help with that? Do they have access to the slides?
Yeah, if you want to share those with me, they can send an email. I can post my email.
Sure.
And then I can send it to them as a PDF. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, perfect. So I will send those over, and then if you guys want them, you can get them that way. Okay. Will there be prerequisites before you start your program? Prerequisites, there could be. It depends on the program that you're applying to. So you kind of want to check on their website and see what the prerequisites are for that program. Definitely advisors might ask you for certain coursework before they bring you onto a program or into a program, but again, it depends on the program that you're applying to. Okay, someone is asking here, what are the characteristics of a good advisor? What should I expect from my advisor? This, again, depends on your kind of communication style. I'll give you my personal experience and what I kind of looked for. I didn't know very much going into it and how important that relationship was, but kind of as I've grown with my advisor, I've seen that for us, it was very important to be able to communicate about what we were feeling and what kind of support we needed and what expectations we had. So for me, I would say communication is huge. You need to be able to ask them questions. For example, you need to be open about funding, and if you need support in that sense, you need to be able to tell them if you're not understanding something. So you should not feel, being intimidated is okay. That might be your own feelings, but you should feel comfortable enough to be able to ask questions. Okay. I would say if you feel like you're being demeaned or you feel really like this person is not supporting you, those aren't good feelings to have, but you kind of want to ask yourself, like, if those are maybe your own insecurities or they really are coming from the relationship. And that's sometimes a really hard thing to tell. And I'll give you an example. Again, with this imposter syndrome, when I first started, I was very young and I felt very out of place. And I always felt like I didn't know enough to be there. Okay. So one of the things my advisor was really good about is actually he recognized that in me, and he kind of was able to fix it by really giving me a lot of responsibility, and that helped me grow my confidence. So he was able to make up for these things that I wasn't totally confident about, and I liked that. And now in retrospect, I think that was really important. So again, I think it's difficult to know right away, especially because you won't have that much time to know your advisor before you get into the program. So you kind of just have to hope for the best, try your best to meet with that person ahead of time. Again, this can be an interview process in both directions. You can be interviewing the program just like they're interviewing you. Okay. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Let me see. Okay, I think one more question, Daniel, here. What advice would you give to undergrads in strengthening their readiness for a PhD program? Definitely get involved in research. That is my number one piece of advice. Get involved in research. That is what you would be doing in a PhD program. That will give you the best exposure to research. To your PhD. It'll give you the best exposure in working with an advisor. Okay. And it'll give you a mentor that you could, like a lifelong mentor. So I still keep in touch with my thesis advisor from Fresno State. We still talk often. When I go to Fresno, I have coffee with him. I really value his opinion, and I even talk to him throughout my PhD. And my former advisor from UC Irvine, I'm still working on publishing papers with him. And so I really value those mentoring experiences, and I would say definitely try to start building that network for yourself. Okay. I don't see any more questions, but if you guys have any more questions, okay, I see one more. Is it okay if I answer these last two, or are we over?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
I do want to honor that we're a little bit past the time that we set up for the event, but no problem whatsoever. If you want to keep answering questions, no harm at all. Just letting everybody know that if you start logging off, just make sure you do the survey. But by all means, if y'all have any more questions and you're okay with answering them, no problem.
Okay, we'll do these last two, and then I'll slide back up here to my email. You guys are definitely welcome to email me with any questions you guys might have, and I'm happy to help with that. Okay, so the last two questions: is it worth it for money to invest many years in research? I'm not sure I understand this question, because the idea for a PhD at least is that you would want to secure funding for your PhD. So I'm not sure if you mean investing in your own research or in doing research, but definitely the goal is that you do want to be a part of your some type of TA-ship or research assistantship where you can gain that kind of funding for your PhD. Okay, does PhD program help their students secure jobs after graduation? They could. They definitely, you still have like a career center on campus. I worked for the career center when I was applying for jobs. There's definitely a lot of resources at different campuses have, so you might want to look into that beforehand. But my advisor also helped me throughout that process a lot. So it just depends on the program, I would say. Okay, so I think we will stop for today. Thank you guys all for attending and for listening. I hope this was helpful. And I hope I got all your questions answered. But again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is my Fullerton email here. And I'm happy to kind of further talk about anything you guys want to go over. So thank you.